Hello, everyone. My name is Brennan Marr. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. And welcome to Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. Today we're going to cast our minds back to 1996, to Shadows of the Empire. Shadows of the Empire was a multimedia Star Wars project that occurred in 1996 to tell the story of what occurred between the events of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Of course, this is Legends, but I think it's important to talk about nonetheless. Now, the most famous element of this multimedia project was, of course, the video game for the Nintendo 64, which I played to death, and is the version of the story I am most familiar with. The story is basically that not only are our heroes attempting to free Han Solo from the carbonite, but on Coruscant, the crime lord Prince Shizor, leader of the Black Sun crime syndicate, is trying to discredit Darth Vader in the eyes of the Emperor. Shizor becomes aware of Vader's son, Luke, and Vader's plan to turn Luke to the dark side, and Prince Shizor concocts a plan to kill Luke Skywalker so that Prince Shizor can rise in the Emperor's eyes by depriving Vader of the opportunity to turn his son to the dark side. Of course, Prince Shizor would not want Palpatine to know this, of course. So it's a story of assassins and Leia and others trying to figure out how to rescue Han Solo. And this story was told in a novel, a comic book series, the video game, trading cards, a soundtrack, and a toy line. And this is really the first multimedia project that Lucasfilm ever decided to create. They've since done more, but this is really the first time that they ever attempted to tell a story in so large of a fashion. And it was a big deal, I guess. I bet everybody met at Skywalker Ranch, and they began to plan this out. Yeah, so what happened was that the special editions of the Star Wars films were supposed to come out in 1996. But because they had to be delayed, and also, by the way, not only were the special editions supposed to come out earlier, but the prequels were supposed to come out earlier. The special editions would be 1996, and the prequel trilogy would begin in 1997. But when plans changed and they had to move things, they decided to put out the Shadows of the Empire so that would kind of give fans a little appetizer, I guess. And I think it worked. Because Shadows of the Empire, to this day, definitely the video game is one of the most beloved Nintendo games, at least on the N64. And those fans who grew up with the Shadows of the Empire remember it quite fondly. Now, while it is no longer canon, certain things like the Black Sun crime syndicate and the Falleen alien species and other such creations have made it into the canon of Star Wars through the Clone Wars and other such things. In fact, when Darth Maul in the Clone Wars animated series becomes the leader of Black Sun and unites it with the other crime syndicates to create what he calls the Shadow Collective. So many things from this Legends story have made it into canon. We're going to take a short break to hear about our sponsor. And when we come back, I'm going to delve into some more detail about this project. See you in a moment. Hello there, this is Brennan Marr, host of Page Turners They Were Not, a Star Wars podcast. And I'm here to tell you about Anchor. Anchor is the best way to make a podcast. Why is that? Well, first off, it's free. Yes, you heard me right. Anchor is free. Anchor has all the tools you need to make a podcast from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you on various platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can make money from your podcast. And get this, with no minimum listenership. That means you can make money even if no one listens to your podcast. That, of course, is not ideal, as Anchor will allow you to spread your podcast, bring in more viewers, and you can make more money because of it. Everything you need to make a podcast is in one place on Anchor. If you're interested, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thank you, and may the Force be with you. Okay, and that was a word about Anchor. Now, I must confess, I have never read the comic adaptation or the comic book version of Shadows of the Empire, and I never owned any of the toys. I did read the novel by Steve Perry. I, of course, played the N64 game to death. I still have it. I still have my N64. It still works. I kept all my games. And then I did also buy the soundtrack. Now, the soundtrack is very, very interesting. Because it wasn't written for the video game, even though it's used in the game. It was actually written as kind of its own thing. There's a term for that musically, but I'm a little lost on what that is. But it's basically that the composer kind of was given the general idea and was able to write the music kind of on a blank slate. And I own the soundtrack, and I have it on my iTunes right now, and I listen to it quite frequently. So the score is by Scottish composer Joel McNeely. Conducting the Royal Scottish National Orchestra with a chorus. They recorded it in Glasgow. And it really is an excellent addition to the Star Wars music. Joel McNeely, I think, writes some excellent music. And I think it fits so well into the Star Wars pantheon of music. Just like John Powell's music in Solo, and to a degree Michael Giacchino's music to Rogue One. So it's very, very interesting, and if you haven't listened to it, I cannot recommend it enough. There are a couple of very, very beautiful pieces in here, including the Battle of Gull, The Seduction of Princess Leia, The Southern Underground. Great music. Now, you may be wondering, The Seduction of Princess Leia? Yes. The evil Prince Shizor it attempts to seduce Princess Leia. What Joel McNeely writes is this haunting waltz. That is actually beautiful. Kind of a strange way, and it's quite good. Now, what's interesting is Shadows of the Empire, the final piece called The Destruction of Shizor's Palace, contains an interesting bit of music called Da Huerta Verde, which is an epic poem that tells the story of something that occurred very early on in the Star Wars timeline. There was very, very back in the 80s, with the Star Wars Droids animated series, there was a bit of backstory was given about an ancient conflict that occurred on Coruscant. Thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years before the events of the movies. And the story of that became this epic poem called Da Huerta Verde, which was written by Star Wars sound designer Ben Burtt. And Joel McNeely incorporated that choral piece into the final piece of Shadows of the Empire. The poem means, Da Huerta Verde means Rage of the Shadow Warriors. And it actually makes a nice addition to the soundtrack. Now, the reason I'm talking so much about the music is simply because to me, that is what is stuck in my mind the most of Shadows of the Empire. Okay. And I think that really is astonishing that they did that. And that's probably my favorite part of it. Now, to be clear, the video game itself is fantastic. Now, the first level of the game is the Battle of Hoth, where you play as Dash Rendar flying a snow speeder. First you begin by destroying probe droids, and then eventually you end up harpooning AT-ATs, like they do in the movies. And it's kind of hard, but it's actually, I think, maybe gets more play than any of the other levels. But it's really great stuff, and if you have not played it, you probably should go online and watch people play through it. This game is quite good and was really a lot of fun. And so for me, the game and the soundtrack are what stick out the most. I must confess, I only read the novel once. But I felt like it was good to celebrate it today, to kind of cast our minds back to the days when all that we really had were the original Star Wars trilogy. There were some novels and comics coming out in the 90s, but as far as film was concerned, there wasn't a whole lot. But Shadows of the Empire, to me and to my generation, will always be one of the highlights of growing up as a Star Wars fan in the 90s. So those are my thoughts on Shadows of the Empire. If you're not familiar with it, check out the game, the soundtrack, the comics, or the novel. And hopefully you'll find the same joy that I found growing up with it as a kid way back in 1996. My name is Brennan Marr. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. Thank you for tuning in to Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you.